This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
You know what I love and hate about arm day at the gym? The workouts are brutal. It's always a miserable experience. But then I get to look at myself in the mirror after a good pump and I'm like, yeah, dude. Any gym bro that ever tries to tell you that arm day is the best day, liars. I'll take leg day any day of the week. Even my chest and bag day is more preferable. So this is actually take two with me trying to record this. The minute I tried to sit down to start recording a minute ago, there were at least 28 ambulances and 15 fire trucks going down the main highway. So I just tapped out. Y'all don't want to be hearing obnoxious siren noises in the background. It was comical. I'm just patiently sitting, waiting for the noise to drown out. And then literally 5 seconds later, another godforsaken siren. It's like, what is going on? Was there a 20-car pileup? Hopefully this will be a better take. It is the Friday show. We are the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. The wrestling podcast nobody knows but everyone needs. As you can see today, we're only going to be covering WCW and Midsouth. I did not have a chance to watch the next World Class taping over the weekend. WWF Retro pay-per-view took up a little more time than I thought it would. So we're just recapping two segments today. Sorry for all the die-hard world-class fanatics that like hearing my reviews. We've only got like 8 or 9 more episodes to review before I completely can the world-class series next year. At this rate, the bloom is pretty much off the rose. But I promised we'd see it through to the end. And I'm also hoping that this coming weekend won't be as hectic. Can't make any promises. But make sure y'all subscribe, comment, give the show a like. Come back to check out the FSWR channel on Mondays and Fridays, YouTube and Rumble. I've actually got a decent amount of material to talk about with these retro shows. So without wasting any more time, let's get into the fun stuff. Well, we're about 1 week away from the big Halloween Havoc pay-per-view. And they've actually done considerably well promoting a fully booked card. Even if the Thunderdome Cage match is more built around the gimmick innovation than the actual feud itself. And even though they technically had one more syndicated show the following week, since we're already reviewing the pay-per-view next weekend, we're going to treat this one like the go-home to the pay-per-view. It was a full 2-hour show as well, so plenty of footage to cover. Let's dive in. Kicking things off with the Fantastics versus Lee Scott and Agent Steel. And this is actually Bobby and Jackie Fulton. No Tommy Rogers. I don't recall the story as to why Tommy didn't come back to the NWA in late '89. Obviously, we saw the original Fantastics as early as February or March of this year, but they ended up both leaving because of some kind of contract dispute. So the Fulton showed up here in '89, and I think technically Bobby had already been teaming with Jackie elsewhere. The AWA, it might have been. I don't remember. I also don't remember a whole lot about Bobby and Jackie's run in WCW. I have way more vivid memories of seeing Bobby and Jackie work for Cornette and Smoky Mountain. I never took issue with Bobby and Jackie taking the name of the Fantastics. I did, however, take issue with their choice of ring gear. I know the Fantastics were sort of viewed as sex symbols for all the ladies back in the day, but even they were not able to pull off the split pants, split short trunk look. There's not a wrestler, dead or alive, that's ever pulled off that look. Always looks horrible. And that was custom gear, by the way. They actually had to have somebody make that for them, which makes it even more egregious. So they're out there having this match, and they're just beating the crap out of Lee Scott. One move after another. Agent Steel is just standing on the apron for a good solid 10 minutes, just watching his tag partner get demolished. And that is no exaggeration. From start to finish, I believe the entire match clocked in at a little under 9.5 minutes. 9.5 minutes of Bobby and Jackie working over Lee Scott. To say it got very boring after a while would be generous. There was a point where I'm sitting there like, all right, guys, I think we're good to take it home. And like immediately on cue, as soon as I said it out loud, Bobby or Jackie would just go to a mat hold and start working over a body part on Lee for a while. Should have kept my mouth shut. Then finally, after the world's longest belabored squash match, the Fantastics hit their little flipping senton splash out of the corner on Scott to get the pin. Yeah. Guess that tends to happen when you got 2 hours to kill. You take squash matches that should conceivably go 3 or 4 minutes and try to broaden them out twice as long. So following that, we had Flair, Sting, and Ole at the interview station to talk about the Thunderdome Cage match. Flair did a lot of his usual shtick with overhyping and overselling the pay-per-view, claiming that Philly has the best group of passionate wrestling fans on the planet, which isn't entirely off base. I would not call them the most passionate. Definitely more passionate than places like bumfuck Texas. Sting, well, to be honest with you, I'm still trying to figure out what he was getting at. I think he was trying to imply that he and Flair were going to try to climb the electrified cage because they're morons, I guess. Or they just really like the feeling of 200-volt electricity pumping through their nervous system. I don't fucking know. And then only try to save it by reminding everybody that the match can only be decided when either team's corner man throws in the towel for their team. The designated Terminator. Still such a wacky name. Oh yeah, and Bruno's the guest referee. in case they couldn't have possibly understated that enough, the definition of putting a hat on a hat. More gimmicks and more stipulations. Even if we are talking about one of the biggest names in professional wrestling history. Did they ever explain why Bruno Sammartino came in to be the referee? Was it literally just because they were in Philly? I mean, I'm not saying it was a dumb call, but you couldn't have had the guy show up on television a couple times. Just throwing it out there. So then we had Gene Ligon versus Tom Zank. They showed an inset pre-tape where Zank plugged his match with Mike Rotunda for the pay-per-view. The only thing I took away from it was him pronouncing the pay-per-view Halloween Havoc. Rest of it was just the usual cheesy verbiage we've been hearing from him. God bless Ross and Cornette, man. But they were trying so hard to put this guy over on commentary throughout the match. Talking about how the kids have taken to the Z-Man. How he's a family man who respects authority. Says his prayers, takes his vitamins, drinks whole milk. Just the most vanilla personality on the face of the planet. And I'm sitting there listening to him like, they do realize that none of this makes Tom Zank come off as cool, right? Them talking about him respecting authority and being this super genuine, kind man with a pearly white smile. I mean, yeah, they're good attributes to have. But pro wrestlers are supposed to be these larger-than-life personalities that go beyond the realm of your average, everyday person. Everything they described about Zank here made him come across as just that. Average. Which is precisely what they did not need to be doing. I know it might just seem like I'm nitpicking, but think about it this way. If someone described a pro wrestler in the manner Cornette and Ross did here, would you ever think to want to cheer that guy or root for him to become the top world champion? Zank won with a sleeper hold. That's all I cared to write down about it. Aside from all the terribly bland descriptors they were throwing out. And then you have guys like Dr. Death, who are just plain crazy and off their fucking rocker. But at least Dr. Death comes across like a badass and somebody you wouldn't want to mess with. Now, it didn't save the fact that he completely butchered his way through this promo. But what can you do? I mean, they're already looking past the Pillman-Luger feud, you can tell. Now they got Williams calling out Luger and letting everybody know that he's got his sights set on the U.S. heavyweight title. Promise that Luger's going to need heavy medical attention when he gets done with him. Harsh. And for the record, they were implying some sort of angle that went down between these two on a live event recently. I have no idea what happened, and it was never shown on camera. The only thing we know is that apparently Luger tried to end Dr. Death's career. Or something. So we pitched to the ring for Rick Cannon and Ricky Nelson versus Sid Vicious. A 2-on-1 handicap match. Because I guess Dan Spivey was hurt. I've stopped trying to keep track of who's constantly getting hurt in the skyscrapers. So Sid went out there and beat these guys in under a minute with a power bomb. Teddy Long was arguing with Dr. Death at the interview position for some reason. We went from Dr. Death challenging the U.S. champion to now he is challenging both members of the Skyscrapers to a fight. Even though I'm pretty sure the pay-per-view match on Sunday is Dr. Death and the Midnight Express versus the Samoans. So why he's calling out Spivey and Sid, I couldn't fucking tell you. Probably the same reason the Skyscrapers are trying to stir up crap with Dr. Death when they're supposed to be facing the Road Warriors in a week. Going a little overboard with the layered stories, guys. It's getting really hard to follow who's mad at who. On the subject of the Skyscrapers Road Warriors feud, after they did the Halloween Havoc infomercial plug, they went to some footage on a recent Power Hour edition. After the Road Warriors got done working over their televised squash, then they immediately called out Spivey and Sid to a fight. And what we got here was a good old-fashioned Mexican standoff. It was very riveting television, I must say. I'm always a fan of guys staring at each other without ever actually coming to blows. Makes for great, compelling television. It made me laugh because everybody in the segment looked at least somewhat menacing. And then there was Spivey, who just looked like he was trying to hold back a giant wet fart. For the record, even if the teams had come to blows here, it would not have made me any less excited to see this match at the pay-per-view. Said it before, and I will say it again. There's a reason the Road Warriors never fared in the unbreakable force and movable object dynamic. You pit them up against guys their size. The outcome was never good. It's been a long time since I've seen that match, and I remember it not being very good. Say that much. And so then we had a Teddy Long, Norman the Lunatic interview. What it wound up turning into was a Teddy Long rebuke promo where he tore into Norman and told him to shut up and stand in the background. Literally so he could just cut a promo to put over the Skyscrapers. So, yeah, you think they're teasing a breakup between Teddy and Norman? Hard to tell. They're being really inconspicuous about it. Which then brought us to Thad Clark versus Norman. Or I guess it was Tad Clark. And this is really the point we've now reached with the Norman gimmick. We couldn't get him over as a scary, out-of-control maniac from the insane asylum. So why not? Let's try and make him a lovable, pitiful babyface from the insane asylum, who now loves kids and stuffed animals and rainbows and puppy dogs. Yeah, that'll get him over. You know what would have probably helped Norman get over in WCW? Ditching the stupid gimmick altogether and making him somebody the fans could actually care about. And no, Trucker Norman was not the answer either. Thanks, Oli. He won with a seated splash in a minute. Teddy Long yelled at him some more. It was stupid. Also stupid, everything about the dynamic dudes. But you already knew that. They worked a match with Keith Steinborn and Joe Kazana. The thing that I love hating on with the dudes is that everybody, including the boys in the locker room, know how god-awful the gimmick is. Like, even when you have situations like the Freebirds making all these passive-aggressive comments about them on commentary, saying that Johnny and Shane are good kids, but they aren't even close to ranking amongst the top 10 or top 20 of all-time tag teams. Despite that Hayes and Garvin are heels, they're not wrong. They are 100% correct. The dudes are nowhere near the top 20 of all-time great tag teams. And they never will be. Because they suck. And everybody knows it. Kayfabe or not, the Freebirds are not wrong. It also made everything about the post-match hilarious because the dudes are out there working over the job, guys. Nobody in the crowd cares. They're all just sitting around like unresponsive NPCs. And so you eventually get Hayes and Garvin attacking the dudes for the DQ, which leads to this awesome moment where Cornette is calling for the Midnights to run out and help. And they're just taking their good old time running down to help Shane and Johnny. Fucking stands there just taking off his watch and trying to remove his necklace. Slowly climbing up to the ring apron. By the time he takes off all his jewelry, Bobby had already run off the Freebirds by himself. So Stan just gets in the ring and shrugs his shoulders like, oh well, too late. The whole thing's funny because you can clearly see where it's all going in storyline. But even just analyzing it from the perspective that Cornette's working in favor for both teams, let's play a hypothetical situation here. The idea that Bobby and Stan care so little about the dynamic dudes, they can't even make a concerted effort to try and save them when they're getting beaten up by another set of heels. That to me will never not be comedy. Now we'll come back and revisit the Midnight Express story later on. But after that, we had this very peculiar promo with Terry Funk and Gary Hart. They are talking with JR, going over some hypotheticals that could take place in the Thunderdome Cage. And Funk is practically pleading with Gary Hart that no matter what the circumstances, no matter what the situation is, no matter what kind of injury Funk or Muta might sustain in that cage match, he does not want Gary to throw in the towel. And as Gary absolves himself of all responsibility that happens in the match, he gives Funk his word. He will not throw in the towel for any reason. Can anybody say with me, spoiler alert? Don't get me wrong. The delivery was great here. It was a very chilling promo. But after hearing the dialogue here, did anyone listen to this and not expect Gary to throw in the towel at the pay-per-view? Couldn't have been any more telegraphed. So then we had Tony Subra and the Italian Stallion versus the Freebirds. And I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't point out the sign that a young lady came to center stage with this week. It's not often they go to crowd shots to show people holding up signs, but this one was so good, I can no longer refer to them as Michael Hayes or Jimmy Garvin. They will now forever be known as Michelle Hayes and Jenny Garvin, our quote, Sissy World Tag Team Champions. You think Bill Watts put her up to it? I know it's been several years, but we have heard Watts call Hayes a sissy on Midsouth television before. I think he paid her off. I actually would have replaced Jenny with Ginny Garvin instead. Then it would have been perfect. Michelle Hayes and Ginny Garvin. That's what I'm going to start calling them now, just to rib them. So Michelle and Ginny worked him over for several minutes as Cornette relayed the ongoing story with the Midnights and the Dudes. I mean, he's now basically implying that Stan is the problem. Even Bobby's trying to play the middle ground peacemaker. It is still a bitter pill to swallow, having to think that there was a brief window where the Midnight Express were playing second fiddle to the fucking Dynamic Dudes of all people. But to be fair, it only lasted for a few months. Because even Jim Herd recognized how god-awful the Dude's gimmick was. I know I got sidetracked there. The Birds won after Hayes hit a DDT on Suber. It's pretty much all I cared to write down about it. Then they did a promo to plug the title match at the pay-per-view. And aside from them putting over the idea that nobody's capable of beating them for the world titles in the NWA, we also had a very provocative homoerotic quote from Michelle Hayes here that, to a lesser extent, even made JR break character momentarily, where he straight up called him Jim Spanky Ross, and then he followed it by saying, the harder they come, the harder we get. To which JR then squinted and looked at the camera very perplexed. I mean, it was probably the most homoerotic quote we've heard on the Superstation since Hawk threatened to rape Ric Flair a year or two back. There's more footage for your Wrestling Out of Context compilation. So that led us to a pretty iconic moment in the highlight reel of Jim Cornette's career. Something he's actually recounted many times on his podcast before, and until you actually see the footage, I don't think you can appreciate just how truly great it was. So all throughout hour one, Corny was plugging this meeting he was supposed to have with woman in her hotel room. And we finally get the footage where Cornette's sitting around at a table waiting for her. He's trying to get to the bottom of what's been going on between her and this tag team Doom. And he's waiting around for quite a while. Woman's playing the old-fashionably late card. And she eventually shows up with a bottle of champagne. Immediately goes into seducing Cornette. Trying to get him to pour a couple glasses while they talk. And it's great because Cornette's just mesmerized by woman. He just can't take his eyes off of her. And he's got his thumb on the bottle cork. And his woman's stroking his chin and trying to get him all excited. The cork bottle pops off, goes flying into the stratosphere. Champagne bubbles going all over the place. And of course, then Cornette realizes what's going on. So he goes, I'm not here to have my chin stroked, my nipples twisted, or any of that nonsense. I don't even drink, unless it's Pepsi. Believe it or not, that was actually the part that made me crack. Not even the cork bottle popping, although that was also funny. It was him casually noting that he doesn't drink, unless it's Pepsi. which turned out to be a really bad choice when he had started having heart palpitations in a year's time. Not to get dark in a hurry. So then they finally started talking about why woman bailed on Rick Steiner, why she turned her back on him and left him high and dry. And this was where my red pill lens started coming to the forefront. So I'm just listening to Nancy go through every trope of women never being satisfied and always wanting to be treated like royalty, looking for the next best option. I know this is all kayfabe, but there was also a sense of reality to everything she was saying. Her talking about how she used Rick Steiner to get into wrestling because he was an easy target. Yeah, sure, Rick was a nice guy, but zoo trips and meaningless dinner dates, that wasn't going to satisfy her. She wanted to be treated like a woman. She wanted fine dining and big expensive luxury dates. And so Corny basically concluded with, seems you're more content with using guys until they satisfy your usefulness. Then you cast him aside and monkey branch to the next guy. Yeah. Sounds a lot like the modern dating market, doesn't it, Jim? He did have a great closing line here where he goes, I don't think we learned any more about who woman is, but we sure know what she is. You're right. I believe the term is a hewer, as Stu Hart would say. So then we had Mike Rotunda versus Greg Evans. A fine professional wrestling match that was virtually impossible to care about given everything we just saw in the previous 3 minutes. Rotunda won with a butterfly suplex. By the way, Cornette gets the award for the worst dad joke of the year in this segment. When he asked JR, what do you call Terry Funk when he gets lit up by an electrified cage? Electrified Funk. Yes, a Wild Cherry reference in 1989. That's what this show needed in the middle of hour 2. And then we came back to relay the footage of the altercation between Pillman and Luger from the other week. The most heated brawl we've seen in quite some time on the Superstation. And I still maintain, it's one of the more white-hot programs we've seen throughout all of '89. Maybe only behind Steamboat, Flair, and possibly Flair and Funk. We also had a pre-tape promo where Luger basically tried to compare himself to Freddy Krueger in Poltergeist. Talking about how Pillman's rattled his cage in more ways than one. Now Luger's going to fire back and prepare to take down the man that's been poking and prodding him for weeks and weeks. And, well, he basically inferred that the feud is no longer about the U.S. heavyweight title. It is now about reputation. That's what the feud means to Luger now. It is no longer about the importance of the belt. It's about saving his reputation. Because that apparently matters in Luger's playbook. I think Pillman just wants to be the fucking champion, but that's just me. Trying to call balls and strikes here. What do I know? By the way, Freddy Krueger and Poltergeist? What the hell? I don't want to read too much into it. It's a Lex Luger promo. They were always hit and miss. He also had a match with Richard Sartain this week. He was certainly working here like Freddy Krueger, or at least in the manner I would imagine Freddy Krueger would work. Just beating the teetotal shit out of this poor guy. It was weird because I was trying to listen to the crowd here. The audio wasn't very good to begin with. They were chanting, "We want somebody." And from what it sounded like, it almost came off like they were chanting, "We want Flair." They were probably chanting for Pillman. I just couldn't tell for sure. Luger went over with the rack. Despite my critiques of some of Luger's promo delivery this week, I do like the idea behind the story where Pillman's done such an effective job getting under Luger's skin. Now they basically got him playing defense and trying to prove to everybody that he's not worried about losing to Pillman. It's not the traditional case where you have a cocky heel champion going in underestimating his lesser experienced opponent. It's a nice dichotomy, especially with how serious they are in getting over Pillman as a potential top babyface. Moving on from that, we had Dr. Death beating Fred Avery in a relatively quick squash. I still love poking fun at Fred Avery for looking like a discount version of Jim Neidhart. If Neidhart didn't shave any of his body hair and grew about 30 pounds of love handles. So Williams beat him up for a while and did a lot of power moves. I was impressed he could actually halfway get him overhead for a military press. It wasn't pretty looking, but still cool to actually see him pick up a 330-pound fat fuck like that. He won with the Oklahoma Stampede. And I know I say it all the time, but God, was he in phenomenal ring shape during this time. Impeccable. So then we go to this Midnight's interview where they had some dirty laundry to air. The tensions are riding high amongst Bobby, Stan, and Cornette. Now we know that Bobby and Stan are really not on the same page as the Dynamic Dudes. But now they're making it clear to Jim that they don't appreciate being neglected in favor of two punks that haven't proven anything in wrestling so far. They're very bitter. And I gotta say, man, when you take into account how close these three were, the fact that you never heard any stories break out with Bobby, Stan, or Cornette getting into public arguments backstage or anything, it made this whole thing come off that much better. Because they really sold it like they were furious with one another. It started here with Stan and JC going back and forth. JC's claiming that Stan's made the Midnights look like jackasses the past couple weeks with his bitter attitude. Stan's claiming that Cornette's spending so much time trying to favor the dudes. Well, he's completely forgotten that the Midnights are sitting around collecting dust waiting for a title shot. Cornette actually had a great comeback line there as he fired back at Stan and told him, "Yeah, well, maybe you and Bobby would be tag team champions if you spent a little less time chasing girls on the beach." Sick burn. And again, all this is great stuff. You have beautiful Bobby eventually chiming in and telling Cornette that Stan's the sound one in this whole conversation. He's making a lot of good, valid points. And, well, they all eventually leave together, which was a bit odd. I mean, they're getting into a shouting match, and then they're just like, all right, let's all walk away together. And again, too, you do have to consider that this is all being presented under the guise that there's real actual tension with the Midnight Express, which I 100% believed at the time. I had no reason to ever think this was being done as a setup, which is what made the whole thing that much more captivating. Some really awesome material. It was just a shame it's such a low-status feud that doesn't really mean much in the grand scheme of everything else happening on the program right now. It's like, yeah, they're drawing attention to it and giving it focal screen time every week, but it is technically an underneath feud with two tag teams that Herd doesn't really think all that highly of. So, I mean, what does that say? Next, we had Flying Brian taking on Rusty Riddle. I mistyped Flying Brian as Flying Brain. Forgot to change it. Almost threw myself off there reading that. This might have been the first time they ever acknowledged that Rusty Riddle was from Malibu, California. When I heard that, it's like, yeah, God, that is such a Californian name. Rusty Riddle. Could have been an honorary member of the Dynamic Dudes. So the match here is going along relatively fine. And right before he hits Air Pillman, there's a spot in the corner where Pillman is supposed to leapfrog over Riddle, but they got their timing wrong, so they ended up colliding with each other. So Riddle, ever the professional here, he slaps on a full Nelson lock, and then he just lets go. And then Pillman turns around and punches him right in the face. Great logic. I had this man in a full Nelson, and for no reason at all, I will simply let go of the hold and then do nothing. Except get laid out with a punch to the jaw like a complete geek. It used to be that I would spend like 5 minutes burying every single jobber and talking about how horrible they all were. I'm just numb to it all at this point. I see a bad job guy on TV and I don't even think twice about it. I just shake my head and move on. It's become such status quo. Unless we're talking about Snake Brown, then we can have some real fun. Whatever happened to that guy? Snake Brown. I miss that wacky motherfucker. Anyway, that led us to the last match with the Steiners taking on Tommy Angel and Jerry Price. There was a very scary spot minutes into the match where Rick went to pick up Angel in a suplex position. And you could even tell, as soon as he went to hoist him up, he did not have a good grip on him at all. So he's marching around the ring with Angel upside down in the suplex position. And you start to slowly see Rick lose his grip entirely as he's about to drop Angel right down on top of his head. I watched it back like 4 times. I seriously have no idea how he didn't kill this guy. He literally dropped Angel straight down and narrowly missed dropping him right on his neck and head. Oh my God, it looked brutal. Yeah, you could tell after that point, Angel was looking for any excuse to tag out. Then as soon as Scotty did the Frankensteiner on him, that was it. He just said, fuck this, I'm done. They don't pay me enough to get dropped on my head 15 times in a match. And then the Steiners took turns whipping the other guy for a minute until Scott put him away with a belly-to-belly. It was a long show this week. But you know what? I can confidently say that for the first time in I don't even know how long, I actually sat through a full 2-hour syndicated show without getting antsy or impatient. Oh yeah, there were moments where I wasn't really engaged with the squash material, but by and large, I thought the show was fine. Again, it wasn't technically the last Saturday show before the pay-per-view, but the hype was still on point. It's a full 8-match card, I think. 8 or 9 matches, can't remember. Each of them have their own little unique theme or story going in. They're not all super gripping, but all things considered, it is certainly one of the better pay-per-views they've hyped all year. So I'm actually looking forward to that show next week. You know, again, it's been a long time since I've seen the whole thing in its entirety. But we'll see how it stacks up in comparison to shows like Wrestle War or even the Chi-Town Rumble. So in my best efforts to try to cram in all this wrestling content over the weekend, while still trying to find room to breathe, I had to do a little bit of multitasking while I was watching Midsouth. I wasn't passively watching anything, but temporarily distracted at certain points. That's probably a fair assessment. But I'll do my best to hit the main points and get over all the key stories throughout the episode. Our first item of business came right at the top of the show with General Skandar Akbar standing with JR at the commentary position. As we know, the General made his return last week on Mid-South television, coming out with Killer Khan when he wrestled Magnum TA for the North American title. So he let us know that he's got some news as it pertains to Ted DiBiase, who we have not seen on Mid-South television in well over a year by this point. It was kind of a strange promo in the sense that he just randomly started talking about DiBiase and how he still views him as the real North American champion. And then he pitched to a match dating all the way back to June 9th of 82, when DiBiase beat JYD on television to win the North American title for the first time. I can tell it dated that far back because Bob Roop was doing color with Boyd at the time. That, and they also screen capped the date. It was also significant in the sense that it marked DiBiase's official heel turn, which, I mean, by the time we started reviewing Mid-South, DiBiase had already formed the Rat Pack with Duggan and Bourne. Now, what was the point of them showing the footage? Well, aside from hyping up DiBiase, we can kind of chalk it up to another one of Watts' pity attempts at throwing shade at the dog. Yet again, more footage of seeing the dog flat on his back getting laid out. Then you got Akbar cutting promos on JYD, talking about him failing to meet his contractual obligations and all that bullshit. It's just... You know, at this point, it's become a parody of itself. The more we hear them bring up the dog in any capacity, it's beyond sour grapes. They are determined to make JYD the most hated man in the South. Now again, they're also hyping up the return of DiBiase for next week. And it's not false advertising this time. Remember that period in the fall of last year when they very briefly alluded to the idea that DiBiase would be returning to Mid-South? He did that one pre-tape promo and then nothing ever came of it. Well, it is confirmed. He is coming back. It's actually a little sooner than I remember it being. I didn't think DiBiase came back to Midsouth until like late November, early December of 84. Like right as they were transitioning into the new year. More of that revisionist history coming back. So then we came back to hear some pre-tape comments from Jim Cornette. It was actually a threat he made to the Rock and Roll Express. Still bitter over the fact that the Midnights haven't regained possession of the Mid-South tag belts. Still having to call his mama on the phone every day to let her know that the boys are still trying to win him back. It's become obvious to Jim that he and the Midnights have lost sight on what really brought them to the dance in the first place. And that's making an example out of every single tag team they feuded with. They made an example out of the Bruise Brothers. They made an example out of Magnum TA when they tarred and feathered him. But now the Midnights need to get back to basics. They need to return the favor to one of the Rock and Roll. He won't say who, and he won't say when. But he is making an open promise that either Ricky or Robert would have their career ended in the very near future. Kind of interesting that he made no mention over what they did to the Fantastics. I guess concussing guys with chairs wasn't as heinous as humiliating a man by dressing him like a chicken. Or just wasn't as memorable. Now, of course, in hearing that open threat, it left everybody on the edge of their seats during this Jake Roberts and Jack Victory versus Rock and Roll tag match, leaving everybody wondering what the hell was going to happen. I was on the edge of my seat trying to make out that ugly pattern on Boyd's ring jacket this week. I've seen some terrible ring jacket designs from Boyd in these last couple years. This one was painfully pink and dreadful looking. He was the brightest colored man in the Irish McNeil Boys Club. Insert racial comment here. Despite this being a standard enhancement match for Ricky and Robert, the action was considerably good. It was non-title, but they treated it more like a traditional main event style TV match. Roberts and Victory got a little bit of heat before the big four-way breakdown at the end. There was a funny part where Ricky potatoed Victory right in the fucking face with the toe of his boot. It even popped Watts on commentary. I also very much appreciated the bump Jake took when Ricky and Robert gave him the double drop kick. He did one of those rock bumps whenever he used to take the stunner from Austin back in the day, where he'd take the bump and then flip over onto his stomach with his feet getting caught in the ropes. That was how Jake sold the drop kick. Very much over the top, but not completely unprofessional. Then they just pinned Victory a few seconds later with the same move. Good stuff. And surprisingly, no run-in angle from the Midnights. See, they're trying to be crafty, picking their spots, like smart men do. So from there, I had to step out of the room momentarily to go do something. When I came back, they were right in the middle of this Ernie Ladd squash with some guy named Frank Lane. It was a pretty basic Ernie squash that you would kind of come to expect in 1984. Meaning that he did very little because physically he couldn't really do much to begin with. Still managed to get himself up for the big leg drop at the end, which did in fact look like a struggle. But after he got the win, Magnum TA showed up to confront him. Now we have to recall the issue that boiled over between these two the other week, where Magnum came out to call out Ernie for prank calling his house and spreading rumors that Magnum was making racist comments at all the black athletes in Mid-South. So he showed up this week to throw some fisticuffs. And it went pretty much as you'd anticipate. Buddy Landell ran out to help Ernie jump Magnum for the heat. As they're beating on him, they sent out a couple job guys to get pummeled, only to then get run off by Terry Taylor and Brickhouse Brown. It is a very bizarre surface-level issue they've kind of developed in the story between these guys. Not saying it wasn't topical or an issue at the time, but it just seems really odd to bring in racial discrimination as a centerpiece for a Magnum TA Ernie Ladd program. Especially when they're presenting it from the perspective that Ernie's supposed to be the heel. I'm personally somebody that's kind of fed up with the whole cultural phenomenon over racial topics. I think we're all worse off as a society for continuing to propagate this victim mentality mindset where, we just keep pitting black and whites against each other. Y'all can thank the Obama administration for escalating that one, sending race relations back like 20-something years. It's a little different when you judge it from the perspective of the South in the mid-'80s. Still kind of silly in this context, though. But we got bigger issues we're dealing with in the South right now. For example, the outrage bait over Adrian Street kissing another man to win a championship title. Fuck the black and white issue. We've got a gay man making out with other dudes on camera. We can't be condoning that now. Tell you for sure who wasn't condoning homosexuality in the South. Cowboy Bill Watts. He's too old school. That might work for the folks that live in places like Southern California, not Shreveport. Now, that's traditional Christian redneck country. We don't like them queers down here. So yeah, Adrian Street defended his TV medal against Chris Adams this week. In what wound up becoming an hysterically side-splitting "what the fuck am I witnessing on my monitor" segment. I'm going to say this right now. Everything that happened in this segment, from Watts calling attention to gay people, to the sexual molestation that happened at the end between Terry Taylor and Miss Linda, to the fucking domestic violence we saw between Adrian and Linda where he beat the shit out of her at ringside. This entire segment was out of control. There is no way anything that happened in this next segment would fly in 2025. It was politically incorrect to the nth degree. I'll start from the beginning, though. Now, we talked about Watts. Based on Chris's reactions to Adrian here, didn't look like he was too keen on the homosexual innuendos either. And not to make this entire conversation about Adrian's gimmick, God, Bill Watts, he was just so flagrantly anti-gay it wasn't even funny. There's one other guy on this program that we know he's outright called a sissy. Actually, two. Michael Hayes and Jim Cornette. When he outright called Adrian a sissy after he got bitch slapped by Adams, tells you everything you need to know about Watts' thoughts about the gay community. It's hilarious too because when you omit all the politically incorrect crap that happened in this segment, just judge everything by the work going on in the ring, it was really solid. And they didn't shy away from really laying into one another. They're having a really fine back and forth TV match. The people are into it because everybody likes seeing Adrian get the shit kicked out of him. There was a great spot where Adams caught Street with a super kick and sent him flying out to the floor. Smashed right into the guardrail and sold it like he was dead. Like I said, they were really beating the crap out of one another by the end. And as things are heating up toward the finish, after Street's working over Adams' knee and trying to get him to submit, here comes Terry Taylor. And he decides it's time to get back at Street for what he did to him by grabbing Miss Linda and planting a big old wet kiss on her. Now, let's think about this for a sec. Terry Taylor, unprovoked, came out, grabbed a woman, and began to make out with her. He forced himself on her. This popped the crowd. This was seen as a babyface tactic. In 1984, we call this revenge. In 2025, he would have been outright arrested on the spot. No question. And his career would have also been immediately over. So after he promptly molests Linda and spends a full 30 seconds jamming his tongue down her throat, we go from sexual assault on camera to a downright domestic dispute as Adrian proceeds to grab Linda by the hair and he begins to beat the ever-loving shit out of her. Just smacking her around and tugging at her hair, shoving her into the ring post. I'm just watching all this with my mouth agape, thinking to myself, okay, I know we're talking well over 40 years ago, but how did Watts look at this at the time and think people wouldn't be asking questions after the fact? I laughed because I know it's all work. But for the people that didn't know, I mean, this is like beyond nuclear heat. This could have resulted in some real company backlash. The kind where Adrian would basically have to walk around Shreveport with armed security 24/7. Good Lord. I don't think I could even show this to a non-wrestling fan without it causing an issue. Like, how the fuck am I supposed to defend this in 2025? Rape? Assault? Anti-gay remarks? I mean, I'm a pretty conservative dude by and large, but this is a bit much. Crazy fucking segment. It's just every trope you ever hear people talk about with the Deep South, the rural Deep South in the mid-'80s, it was all on display in this segment. I think the only thing missing was an outright lynching. Oh, and just in case anybody could have possibly cared, Chris Adams won that match by disqualification. How? Why? When? Fuck if I know. But they felt the need to let us know after the break. Great. I'm glad. Can we possibly get a status update on whether or not Adrian's done beating the shit out of his wife in the locker room? No? Okay then. Guess we'll move on. So we had Hercules Hernandez and Dr. Death versus Jim Horton and Shawn Michaels. Yes, that Shawn Michaels. San Antonio's own. his Midsouth TV debut. And boy, he didn't look a day over 18. I'm pretty sure he was actually 19 when he debuted in Midsouth. The true Heartbreak Kid. Youthful and innocent. Until he got his big break in the WWF and his ego grew bigger than his fucking biceps. The thing I found hilarious here, they did a pre-match angle with Hacksaw Duggan showing up to challenge Dr. Death to a fight. And it was great because Duggan really wants this fight with Williams. He's calling him out and saying that if he's so tough, he can put his football helmet up right now for grabs. And they'll do the fight right here, right now in Shreveport. And you got these two macho, masculine hotheads going back and forth, screaming at one another. Testosterone levels are blowing through the roof. Here's how Dr. Death manages to weasel out of this fight. Straight up, he looks at Hacksaw and goes, "I forgot the helmet." Well, I guess that settles it then. They'll have to postpone it for next week. God forbid, we can't have that fight unless we see evidence that the helmet is here. I forgot the helmet. Actually, a perfectly valid excuse for not being able to defend it. If only Duggan could have made the challenge earlier. So instead, we got this tag match as planned. I made a note here that Williams has really trimmed up in the last month. He's lost a lot of weight and he's really starting to gain more body definition. Still a little rough around the edges in the ring. One of the first spots he did, he spiked Michaels right in the back of his head with a suplex. God. Yeah, he's still green, but man is he intense. He and Hercules took turns beating the piss out of Michaels and Horton. Really did a number on Horton at the end. Just muscling him around and slamming him around like a cruiserweight. Doc eventually got the win with the Oklahoma Stampede. We will be seeing plenty more of Sean throughout 85. So don't worry. He didn't go to the AWA until 86. So you'll get your HBK fix plenty over the next year. That led us to Master G versus Bob Owens in a relatively uninspiring squash. He won with his Master Lock submission in about 90 seconds. And then they closed it out with a rematch between Buddy Landell and Johnny Mantell. The great combination tag team that never saw the light of day. Now, off the top of my head, I don't remember if it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, but we did see these two wrestle previously. It was not a tremendously great match to begin with from what I remember, but they decided for whatever reason to run it back here. And it actually wound up being a lot more entertaining than it probably had any right to be. Mainly thanks to Buddy being a great heel personality. So he's out there getting his ass handed to him for the majority of the match. Mantell's just doing one move after another on him. And every so often, Buddy would roll out to the floor to try and stall. But then he'd yell into the camera, "You had enough, boy? You had enough?" And he would slide back in the ring and immediately get his ass kicked again. You know, looking back, they could have removed the entire commentary team. It would not have made a difference. This segment was all Buddy. And so they're out there doing spots for several minutes. and you hear Watts counting down the clock as they're running short on time, he goes, "I'm going to try to get RL-Link to stick with it, because we don't want to lead this great action. We're going to keep the cameras rolling until we get a winner." He says this. Fast forward 10 seconds. They just cut to the end credits. Wonderful. You know, to be fair, by that point, I was sort of mentally checked out anyway. Just, again, a lot of stuff going on for me this weekend, and I barely had time to fit in all the wrestling that I did watch. Looking back, though, I'm glad I didn't omit Midsouth. This show was outstanding, for good and bad reasons. That TV title segment with Adrian Street and Chris Adams, it was just astonishing. Like I said, man, I just watched that with my mouth open the whole time, asking myself how in the world any of it passed the sniff test, even in 1984. Still loved it, but God, so much of that would never see the light of day on television in the modern era. Not without risking cancellation. And, the show had a lot of other good stuff too, no doubt. But nothing topped that TV title segment. Adrian is becoming a must-see attraction with every show. He is so unlike any other talent on the roster. It makes everything he's involved with so much more meaningful when you see it. I really didn't give Adrian the credit that I should have when I saw footage of him for the first time. It was only after he passed away that I went back and watched a lot of his stuff, realizing that he was so much greater than I initially gave him credit for. I mean, everybody knows how fondly I think of Dustin Rhodes. But I'll go on record and say it, man. Adrian Street was Goldust well before Dustin ever became that gimmick. And that's not a knock on Dustin. But everything Adrian represented in Midsouth in '84, it's what the Goldust character should have been in the WWF from '96 through '98, I think. Before his booking went totally off the rails. So I guess more accurately, we're talking 95 and 96. But even during his initial first few months, they never went as far with the Goldust gimmick as they probably should have. And that even includes the stuff with Razor. Because even that was pretty tame, all things considered. Not saying he should have gone out there and smacked around Marlena every week. But Adrian was just so much more effective at towing the line and being the outlandish, eccentric personality. And again, it's not a criticism of Dustin, but he's been on record talking about how he just never really enjoyed being the character. You knew it wasn't genuine. He was just working a gimmick. And yeah, Adrian was working a gimmick too. But he really made everybody believe that he was that guy. And boy, did it draw heat. Probably more heat than what they were anticipating. Just some food for thought. Go watch Adrian Street footage. You will not be disappointed. So, like I said, we did not do World Class this week, so that'll wrap it up for this show here. Again, folks, make sure you come back and check out the FSWR show every Mondays and Fridays for new podcasts. This coming weekend, we will just be planning for Retro Raw on Monday. And then next Friday, we will have the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view, or Halloween Havoc, as Tom Zank would say. And hopefully we'll get back to regular Mid-South and World Class as well. So, packed weekend ahead again. Looking forward to it. But thanks everybody for watching, and we'll talk to you all soon. Take care. Peace out.